And away we go. It's the DFS early bird from Awesemo.com. Dan Strafford, Dave Lockren along with you on this Wednesday morning, getting ready for an 11-game NBA slate. Dave, it's Wednesday. There's no NFL either behind us or immediately in front of us. How the hell are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Hope you're doing well. I'll tell you what, I'm still getting over somewhere. I mildly lost my voice and I had like some chest stuff going on. It happens every year when the seasons turn. It's like the only time I get sick. This time wasn't as bad though, but had a bit of a voice loss. And for what I do, that's not great. Like you can hear it right now. It's getting there. And I'm hoping this goes away sooner than later. But outside of that, things are going well. I had some delicious Chick-fil-A and life is good when you have Chick-fil-A. 12-piece nuggets. It's the number 5, of course. With some waffle fries. Washed it down with a cherry Coke, and I got a small peppermint milkshake, seasonal, of course, on the side.
Have you seen the commercial for KFC's new chicken and waffles item?
Dude, you're going to laugh, but I thought it looked delicious.
Well, no, the food looked delicious. It's one of the stranger commercials I've seen in a while. With
I didn't pay attention to the commercial. I just saw chicken and waffles. I was like, I like chicken and waffles. Probably not from KFC, but
right.
I'll give it a whirl. I haven't been to KFC in probably 15 years.
I don't know last time I ate KFC either. But it was Colonel Sanders dancing with a bottle of Mrs. Butterworth's syrup.
Well, yeah, their commercials are really bad. KFC's commercials are cringeworthy and make me want to change the channel.
Which is impressive for a commercial to do that. You know, like when you really think of how bad it has to be. But
can't handle this 30 seconds.
Nope. But nonetheless, we can talk NBA here. We will touch on position by position, as we always do. We'll talk about some injuries here at the top just to sort of set the scene on what to expect on Wednesday night. You do have Russell Westbrook, who went through a light practice on Tuesday, but has already been deemed out by reports out of Oklahoma City. So we will not have Westbrook here as he continues to be well managed with the ankle injury. So we'll talk Schroeder and Paul George and their usage. I know Damian Lillard is trying to go on Wednesday night, but didn't practice Tuesday. He'll be a game time decision. What other injuries do you have your eye on here, Dave, as we go through this Wednesday slate?
Yeah, so you obviously touched on the biggest ones. Aside from that, there's not a whole lot that jumps off the page. I believe Dwayne Wade's still out. So you'll see some more minutes for Ellington. Mirotic is a big one, actually. He's questionable. That's big because they're playing a pretty bad Minnesota team. Now, interestingly enough, if Saric and Covington play, Saric will help their defense. I guess. I mean, it depends. Do you consider it a lateral move from Butler to Covington? You might, and maybe it doesn't make the biggest difference. But we'll get into that game at length because I think there's a lot of moving parts that make it interesting. Rudy Gay is out as well. I believe there's a back-to-back, and he was sitting out the first game of the back-to-back. Pau Gasol remains out. So there are some bigger ones that you talked about, but then there's also some other ones that'll definitely make a difference. Another big one, Jared Allen is questionable. You'll get the Rondae Hollis-Jefferson minutes. You'll get the Ed Davis minutes. He was great to us the other day. Jonathan Isaac, questionable. And then for Minnesota, Andrew Wiggins and Jeff Teague are still questionable. My guess is Teague plays. I would think Wiggins plays, but it seems he's come down with another minor ailment here. So we'll pay close attention to that. And Alfred Payton, all of them from the same game. You've got 4 guys, all of them starters from the same game that are questionable right now. So that can make a big difference.
I don't want to get too deep into it because we'll probably spend 5 minutes talking about the injury itself, but amazing that Karis LeVert could play again this season.
It looked like his knee dislocated. Like it looked like when he hit the knee at the top, right, went the wrong way. I watched it again and it was tough to watch, but I was curious, like how did the dislocated foot is not what I had anticipated, and he's expected to return this season, which is crazy.
So good for him and good for the Nets. Obviously, LeVert well on his way It's having a all-star season, and hopefully he can get back on the court. I know he suffered from a foot injury at Michigan, which really hampered his draft value, but hopefully he can get back on the court soon for the Brooklyn Nets. Let's talk through point guard at the top. Russell Westbrook, as we said, out. John Wall has been seeing a ton of minutes for the Washington Wizards. Did tick down a little bit in the 117 to 109 win over the Orlando Magic. Had 50.5 DraftKings points, though, in 33 minutes, as opposed to the 40 minutes of play he had over the previous 3 contests. Yeah, Ben Simmons eligible here, Drew Holiday, Kyle Lowry, Kyrie Irving gets the Chicago Bulls. Then we get into a lot of MPE with the likes of Levine, Schroeder, Booker, Mitchell, and the resilient and youthful Derrick Rose at 7,200. At the top end of point guard, who stands out for you?
Yeah, John Wall's definitely a solid play here. I mean, we liked him the other day a little bit more when he was, mid 8K price point, right? That you're always going to target that. He was 8,600 on DraftKings. He's up to 91, but as you mentioned, the minutes have been huge recently. Yeah, 33 minutes last game, but I think that's more of an aberration than anything else. I'd expect him up around 38, potentially 40 if the game stays close. The problem is, I have trouble believing this game is going to stay close. Even with the Wizards, I think that this could get ugly. Cleveland went at home. They blew out the Hornets yesterday. I mean, they blew them out to the point, Dan, where Kemba Walker shot 2 for 16. At one point, he was 1 for 13. It was a brutal game. 1 for 7 from 3. Horrible game for Kemba Walker. One of his worst shooting games ever. But they're playing their second of a back-to-back, and I wouldn't be surprised to see this shorthanded team that's clearly, in tank mode already, just get blasted off the court. Now, that said, I like John Wall a lot. And I think Colin Sexton is fine as well. Had this game not been a total rout, Dan, Colin Sexton, who played 33 minutes, he was on pace to play around 35, 36 again. So now we've seen 3 or 4 straight games where this dude's racking up big run at the point guard position. He took another 16 shots yesterday. And as I mentioned, I expected his assist totals to come up. Only 4, but I still think you're going to start seeing them climb a little bit. So, yeah, him and Clarkson are both very much in play here in this same game.
All right, as we continue on here at point guard, is there a price point or sorry, I should say, is there a player at a price point at this position that stands out because you feel they are underpriced, or somebody that you feel has a high upside due to new usage? Or who do you got in that role?
Ben Simmons really intrigues me here, and it's only because he's going to go entirely overlooked, right? You've got Jimmy Butler coming into the mix. They got the big 3 now. Ben Simmons is below 9K. I believe for the first time all season. To me, that does stand out. Do I have some concerns? Yeah, the concerns are we really don't know what's going on, right? We don't know how this is going to look. But I think it could actually help Simmons. And here's why. Now you have another guy that can space the floor, another guy that when Ben goes to penetrate, goes to drive to the rack, another guy that you need to be very, very cognizant of in Jimmy Butler. Right before it was like, all right, Embiid at the top of the break, and then you had Redick, right? So obviously, Redick is somebody that is a very good shooter. But aside from that, you really weren't too worried about Covington and Sarge. You also don't expect them to take the ball and drive on a kick out. And I think Butler does all of that. So I wouldn't be surprised if Ben Simmons gets some help here. You could see this being a triple-double game. I think it's definitely possible. He's come very close in a bunch of games this season. I still think Ben offers triple-double upside. He's at $8,700 on DraftKings, and that does stand out to me. So, yeah, Ben Simmons in tournaments will be a guy that I'm definitely going to have some of. If Lillard plays, I really just don't see how we don't have some of Damian Lillard here, and we'll have to pay close attention. But against the Lakers, this is a really favorable spot. Lakers are playing the 3rd fastest pace this season. So compared to Portland, who's playing at a middle of the road pace, this is a great pace up spot for Dame. And you're also getting somebody that has a phenomenal matchup as well, not just pace. I mean, the Lakers are going to get demolished by him if he plays his full run and isn't hindered. They've allowed more assists to point guards than any other position, and this should probably surprise no one, but no team is allowing a higher field goal percentage to opposing point guards than the LA Lakers this season. So I'm not a big DVP guy in most cases, but this is one of those spots where it stands out to me because you're not worried about Rondo anymore or Lonzo Ball. I mean, these aren't guys that you're particularly scared are going to lock you down. So Lillard and Simmons are both in good spots. Lillard more than Simmons, but again, I just think Simmons is going to come in with such low ownership that I'm going to have some of them.
All right, we make our way into the mid-tier. Derrick Rose is somebody we have to continue to consider. The usage is there. The minutes are there. Obviously now Jimmy Butler out. Saric and Covington don't come anywhere near Rose in this instance. So probably have to consider at 7,200 against New Orleans a potential Derrick Rose sighting here. You do have Booker. What about Schroeder here? Let me take these two, Schroeder and Rose. Above 7K, and then we can make our way cheaper. Are they in cash game territory? Are they guys you think their floors are considerably safe, or do you see them as more upside plays in these matchups on Wednesday's slate?
Yeah, just let me first mention Kyrie Irving at 8K because this is a really good spot for him. Obviously, you have blowout concerns here. There's no question, but it's I mean, look, it's in Boston. This game could get out of hand quickly. But I still think that Irving's in a really solid spot here, and he's been putting up some monster games. I mean, he's fully back. He's jacking up 20-plus shots recently per game. Everything we're seeing from Irving is what would constitute considering him even at 8K, and I will be considering him. Now, you talk about Schroeder. Schroeder has undoubtedly left something on the court in most cases, but he still is giving you numbers to where you're like, okay, well, he's still giving you numbers where he's not perfect and could do a lot more, but is still putting up, enough. Like last game was really solid. The first start was solid, even though he had 0 assists. One was okay, and then the other was not great. But there's just so much that he offers, Dan. I mean, with Westbrook off the court this season, Schroeder's got a 31.3% usage rate, the same as Paul George. He's got a 30.4% assist rate and 1.19 fantasy points per minute. So you take those numbers, and I actually think that the per minute production and the assist rate could rise. You give him 36 minutes a game at 1.2 fantasy points per minute, you're well over 40 fantasy points. So I like Schroeder a lot here. There's nothing about this Knicks matchup. No, not Ntilikina either, because Ntilikina's minutes are basically – he played 6 minutes last game. The dude's just been terrible. So I'm not worried about that. And then with Derrick Rose, I don't hate him, but I don't think this is a spot where you need to dive in head first, Dan. And I say that because it's not like you're talking about a real favorable price point anymore. We saw him start alongside Jeff Teague, which was nice, but that means that he's probably going to see his assists limited. I know he had 6 last game, but going forward, I think it doesn't help him. So I don't mind Derrick Rose. I think, he's fairly priced now is the thing. He's 72 on FanDuel, which is more that's more favorable, especially considering Schroeder is shooting guard eligible. But I have no problem with Rose. I'm just not prioritizing him.
Makes sense to me, especially probably ownership elevated too, just simply because of the trade and eyeballs on that roster for the usage that may come his way or should continue to come his way with Jimmy Butler out of town. Sub 7K, Doncic, Conley, D'Angelo Russell here with 6,700 price tag, Bledsoe, Dragic, Rubio, Brandon Ingram, point guard and small forward eligible. You mentioned Clarkson earlier for Cleveland. And then we get into the likes of Dennis Smith Jr. still down here at 5,400, Rajon Rondo, Brogdon, and so on. So maybe some mid-tier love and then 1 or 2 cheap guys that at least this early on you have as part of your player pool or for further research for the deep dive that you'll write on Wednesday.
Yes, sir. I think if Elfrid Payton plays, you keep an eye on that. He's cheap. You might get – it would kind of be similar to the Jeff Teague thing where he comes back and he's underpriced. I think it's a really good matchup. So given the matchup and if he were to come back and not have his minutes restricted, you're getting around 31, 33 minutes, if not more from him. All of that looks pretty solid. Also, keep an eye on D'Angelo Russell. Keep an eye on what's going to happen with this rotation and starting lineup now that Karis LeVert is out. We obviously know that Russell's already starting, but he played 32 minutes last game and had a really nice game. So I'm not sure if D'Angelo Russell got more run, 33 minutes, because he was playing really well or because LeVert went out.
Yep.
And Atkinson just wanted to mix things up because, you have Damari Carroll back. You have Joe Harris. You have Crabbe. With LeVert out, I was trying to find a guy that I thought made the most sense to roster in his place. But it was tough to find anyone because, as I mentioned, you have Dudley, Crabbe, Carroll, Harris, a lot of guys that can play the three, that can play the four, and that's kind of LeVert doesn't play the four, but you get the point. If Hollis Jefferson slides to the five with what's his name out, Jared Allen, there's still enough bodies to where that concerns me. But I do think from a cheaper standpoint, Derek White, second half of the last game was really disappointing, right? He started off the game. He had 16.5 points in the first half, fantasy points, and then finished with 20.5, played 26 minutes. I think you could see his playing time move between 26 and 30. I wouldn't even be surprised to see him get some run in a blowout. And he's facing a Phoenix backcourt that I don't even need to speak on because we all know how absolutely bad they are against opposing point guards. And quite frankly, Dan, the Spurs the Spurs were in dire straits in terms of like having legitimate facilitators not named DeMar DeRozan, and that's not really his forte. Derek White definitely helps the scenario. He's had 13 assists over his last 2 games, played 30 and 26 minutes. So his price is up a little bit from where it was. I'm speaking strictly on DraftKings, by the way, because on FanDuel you're not at 56. He's come down, but I still don't think you need to go there. I think Derek White. Mentioned Clarkson, we mentioned Colin Sexton, but I'll definitely have some Derek White because if he does get those 30 minutes in this matchup, even 26 or 28, Dan, that sets him up real nice.
Anybody else worthwhile here at point guard before we move on? I know a lot of the MPE makes it a little bit more difficult to delineate between point guard and shooting guard, and even point guard and small forward, depending on the slate. When you have Simmons and Doncic and even Brandon Ingram here with MPE between point guard and small forward. Anybody else worthwhile before moving on to shooting guard?
I don't like the matchup, but I still think Conley's a little bit underpriced, and he's clearly 100% recovered from that Achilles ailment that plagued him all of last season. I really love what Mike Conley's doing right now. He's playing great basketball, and he's 6,800. So given that he's seen 36 plus minutes in 3 straight games, he's going to get the shots up. I don't like the matchup, but I expect this game to stay competitive. Even though Milwaukee's a 9.5-point favorite, I still think it's going to be competitive enough that Conley can see his normal 35 plus.
All right, let's move on to shooting guard next. And at the top, we honestly have a couple of small forwards, probably more so DeRozan and Leonard. MPE makes it much easier to move them around. DeMar DeRozan coming off back-to-back 30-point outings from a DraftKings perspective, 30.75 and 35.5 respectively, shooting just over 40% in one. No rebounds in the matchup with Sacramento, just 2, I should say, and 8 assists. 23 points, 4 turnovers for 35.5 DraftKings points. Has a matchup here with Phoenix. Then you have Kawhi Leonard against Detroit. You have Drew Holiday against Minnesota is shooting guard eligible here. Made mention that Elfrid Payton could be back here for New Orleans. Zach LaVine, what do you make? Maybe we should start with, I'll hold him for small forward. Zach LaVine, Schroeder, Booker, Beal, Mitchell, and we move on from there. So who's the first shooting guard you want to talk about here? Who, if we're going by the old monikers here for the positions, who's the 2 on this list that you want to start with? Maybe leaving DeRozan and Leonard for small forward, or really up to you?
Yeah, we'll leave Leonard for it. I really do think. Well, we can start with DeRozan. This is not a bad matchup by any stretch. I think we all know that. But I also worry that this is a game where he won't have to do much. He faced Phoenix earlier this year, took 12 shots, played 28 minutes. They crushed them. They won by 30 points in Phoenix. Phoenix is just a bad team. Spurs are a very well-coached team, and I think Derek White being in the rotation helps them. So DeRozan, it's not that he's a bad play. I just don't know if he's a necessary play. Now, I will say 8,900 on FanDuel is really enticing. It is. That's a really solid price point. I would play him over Levine at that price point on FanDuel. Now on DraftKings, Levine, who doesn't have a great matchup against Boston, I think that's clear, and we don't really have to get into that, is playing so many minutes that if this game even stays relatively close, like even a little bit, you're getting another 38, 41 minutes from him. And he's just giving you such consistent numbers. He's fallen below 8K on DraftKings again. Definitely has to be matchup based. But I'm not going to shy away entirely from Levine here, because I do think that price makes him worthwhile, and no one's going to want to play him against Boston. And keep in mind, Oladipo had a really solid game at the 2 against Boston. Devin Booker went off against Boston. This is all within the past week or 10 days. Booker shot 15 of 30, had 60 fantasy points, and how many real points? I think 38. Yeah, 38. And then Jamal Murray, 2 days before that, had a career high in points and took 30 shots himself. So I'm not saying that Boston's defense isn't excellent. It is, and you have Jaylen Brown, you have Marcus Smart, you have even like Terry Rozier, but they've sprung leaks against shooting guards that are similar in that they just chuck up shots and are just more, obviously because of the title of the position, but just more scoring oriented, like true shooting guards like Levine and Mitchell. I think Mitchell's a good play too. You're getting him at a nice price point on DraftKings. I mean, on FanDuel, you're paying 8,300, 74 on DraftKings against Dallas. That's a really favorable spot as well. It's just crazy how deep this position has become over the past couple of years, right? The MPE, as you mentioned, definitely plays a role, but Bradley Beal against Cleveland, 7,500. These mid 7K guys are in really good spots. I love Brad Beal here. No question, he's a good play. I even have some interest in Devin Booker, but it's going to be so hard to get there with all of these other guys making so much sense at the same position. If you work your way down a little bit further, there's even more. We talked about Clarkson already, so you can play him either at point guard or shooting guard. CJ McCollum, you just never know what you're going to get, Dan. He might have a huge game and he might just disappoint wildly, and we saw that in his last time out. But how about Jimmy Butler? Why don't we talk about Butler for a second? He's coming into Philly, playing his first game with the Sixers. He was getting monster minutes under Tom Thibodeau. I wouldn't be surprised to see that decrease maybe a minute or two per game. But Butler coming into his first game with the Sixers at 8,200, forget about his first game with anybody. Think of it, he's now going to be on a team that he seems at least happy to be at or be with. If I told you could play Jimmy Butler at 36, 37 minutes, or say 35 minutes, and he was actually going to give you full effort, I think your answer would be that you'd want to have some exposure to him, even if it's limited, being that we don't necessarily know how his first game is going to pan out. But at that price point, you can't overlook it.
Yeah, that's for the record. That's who I hemmed and hawed at the intro of the position of waiting until small forward to talk about. But
I had a feeling, yeah,
it was a very clear indicator that I was trying to figure that out as I went. But listen, the price point makes sense. Narrative wise, it makes sense. A happy Jimmy Butler is a hard playing Jimmy Butler, and thus the other metrics come into play, the stocks, right? Steals, blocks, assists, other pieces of the game. It's not all points here for him.
Sure. The defensive stats, of course. Yeah,
exactly. So intrigued to see. He is an efficient 3-point shooter. He's not necessarily a prolific 3-point shooter. How much he and Simmons do jibe from an offensive workflow perspective. But I'm not somebody who says, oh, there are too many mouths to feed. Listen, like they're going to score points, like they're going to win games. And right. So it's always funny to watch the dream team. The dream team wins, right? And yes, some of the guys take a back seat some games, but I think this is still three-headed monster. It's not like they have 5 stars on this team.
For sure. Yeah. So, and it's not just another thing too. Normally we don't like to see usage go down, but if you're gaining efficiency at the expense of, a little bit of lost usage while gaining efficiency, which is what I very much think can happen with Embiid and Simmons in this case, you're not going to hate that either.
Right. Absolutely. I think there's maybe at times too much focus on specifically on its own usage, not the total package here on context as to how it can be used in especially this sort of situation. What about mid-tier cheap guys here at shooting guard? You made mention, as we've noticed on the year, that there's a ton of options here. You talked to CJ McCollum. We can make our way down to the likes of Rodney Magruder, who's seen a dip in his minutes per game over the past two. And then again, Echuan Moore sighting last time out. I think he had a career high 30 points, if I do remember correctly. 30 points, 39.5 DraftKings points. It's always funny when the overall points in a game and the DraftKings points mirror each other or come close. You know the player doesn't do much else than score. So
absolutely. Who was this?
Echuan Moore had a career high 30 points in 36 minutes, 2 rebounds, 3 assists, a steal, 1 personal foul, 2 turnovers, 39.5. DraftKings points at 4,700. You take it. Obviously, he's here at 4,900. Any cheap guys at at shooting guard before we move on to small forward?
Honestly, no. There aren't, unless I've mentioned them already. There's no one that really pops off the page. Now I got some at small forward, and we can do that. But no, nobody here that I'm in love with. I mean, you could, if you want to predict or try and predict who from Brooklyn benefits most, you can. But with Damari Carroll back and Joe Harris still seeing big minutes and Alan Crabb already getting low to mid 20s in minutes each game, I just don't see how you're going to make that happen. Now, I will say, if Cedi Osman, who I think is going to play, he did practice on Monday, was ruled out, though, seemingly precautionary on Tuesday. If he is unable to go for some reason, which is still possible, then David Nwaba would be a viable option here. He played, I think, 26 minutes off the bench last game and was good enough to at least warrant consideration at 3,200, almost a dead minimum. But I don't think that'll be the case. It's something we probably won't have to worry about.
All right, let's take the turn here to small forward. We've already talked a good deal about many at the top end, but you have LeBron, you have Giannis, Paul George at 9,600, Simmons, DeRozan, Kawhi, Butler, all eligible here. You talked about Mirotic at the top because of the injury. Aaron Gordon, 7,700, Tim Hardaway Jr., and Josh Richardson. Probably 2 wild cards here at shooting guard and small forward just because of the upside that can come with both of them, but also the low floors that seem to be evident as the season rolls on. Top end, Giannis, is there a team you're afraid of playing him against this season? It just seems usage, rebounding, all sorts of options here for him to put up gigantic stat lines. Do you have any concern here at 11K as a high-end GPP option for Giannis? Would you stay away, or do you think he's just fine here against Memphis?
I'm not that interested, to be honest with you. To be honest with you, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm trying to be like you, bro.
Me, the guy who is deemed himself or used the nickname Punisher in the past is saying he's trying to be like me. Go on.
Oh, man. Okay. Honestly speaking, I think this is probably a spot where you can get away with fading him. I mean, Antetokounmpo is amazing. He's going to put up big numbers all the time. But one thing I've actually noticed recently is that he has kind of struggled in some difficult matchups, right? You look at his numbers against Denver, tough matchup, below 50. And by struggle, it's a relative term. Below 50 fantasy points, 48 against Golden State. Only played 26 minutes there, so he deserves a pass. Portland, tough matchup. He had 40 fantasy points. So as matchup proof as he is, this is one of those spots where I'm having a tough time really falling in love with him. I also think this game plays really slow. I would never talk anyone off Giannis just because I think my train of thought is going to be pretty much the consensus amongst the DFS community, which in that event means that if Giannis is super low owned and offers like 80 fantasy point upside, then you're going to have to get some of them in if you're playing, if you're MMEing. But if you're just playing 1 or 2 or 3 lineups, I definitely don't see the need to start with Giannis here. That's where I'm at on him.
All right, what about down to LeBron, talking Paul George usage-wise here against New York? And then we do probably want to touch on Kawhi a little bit, specifically at small forward. But Paul George, LeBron here, 9,600 and 10-3 respectively. How do they play into your plans on Wednesday?
Man, I would love to play LeBron here, but he just really doesn't seem interested is the wrong word, but you're just not getting full. Interested is a fine word actually, because we all know, you and I have discussed it so many times on the many podcasts we've done. That when LeBron wants to take over, when LeBron wants to be dominant, all he has to do is get on the court. Like that. That's who he is, and and unless the age is beginning to catch up to him a little bit, I still think that this is kind of like LeBron doing what he wants to do, and it worries me a little bit at that price. Paul George, his salary concerns me a little bit, but I really like him here, and that's kind of the problem. I think you have to draw the distinction across sites, but Paul George is still someone that can give you a high ceiling here. I mean, you look against Houston, he would have actually played more minutes in that game, but it was a blowout, and he came out towards the end. He would have played around 38. He had 57 fantasy points, then 50 against Dallas in 38 minutes, and then 52 against Phoenix in 36 minutes, 52 against New Orleans earlier, 5 games back, and that's when Westbrook was active. Paul George against this Knicks team is a really good play. It's just, do you want to cough up that much for him? And that could be difficult. Kawhi Leonard's price has come down. He's 8,600. He's facing the Pistons in Toronto. I really like last game for Kawhi. He was 8,700. Like, all right, below 9K, you can definitely play him. And I had some Kawhi, and he was disappointing for sure. He shot 20 times, but he shot only 7 of 20 and 1 for 6 from 3. It was not a solid or stellar shooting performance by any means, but you're still getting 20 field goal attempts, right? You're still getting high usage, and you still have that ceiling there that might not have come to fruition yet, Dan, but Kawhi Leonard can just go out there and blow the lid off of the place. And I think at his price tag, it's just a spot where you're not jamming him in at all. You're not. Kawhi hasn't been good enough from a fantasy sense to lock him in. But I do see myself getting some exposure to Kawhi. And I hate to be wishy-washy, but when you're that cheap, it's kind of similar to Ben Simmons, right? You're at a mid-7 or mid-8K price point. We know what you're capable of doing. You just haven't been doing it recently. So it puts you in a difficult spot because you don't want to miss out on it. You know they can do it, but you also know that they haven't been doing it. So that's right, where I'm at on both Giannis or both Kawhi and Simmons, and to some extent Giannis. But with Giannis, it's just more so matchup isn't great. Logistically, like on paper, he's not a good play, but Giannis can always become the best play on the slate no matter what.
All right, let's make our way then into the middle of this tier. Who are you leaning towards? What are the guys, small forward, that you think stand out, or at least will be part of the write-up when you write the deep dive? Don't forget, Dave does write Monday, Wednesday, Friday on Awesemo.com. That's called the deep dive. Then he does co-host the deeper dive with Adam. Ship My Money DFS, slow modem, loading computer, still loading computer. Still loading computer. Still loading computer. Adam Scher, of course. Most nights. It depends on the slate. Some smaller slates we may go with just live up until lock or not. So stay tuned for the schedule. But typically you'll see Dave and Adam giving you the lowdown at 5 p.m. Eastern time. If you want to check out Awesemo.com for free, use the promo code EARLYBIRD. It's the name of the show here at the podcast. And you can get 1 week for free, all things included. But to say all that, Dave, to get back to it, where are you going at small forward? Who are some of the names that you think, at least early on here, you have a player pool or a group of players that you want to write up for the deep dive on Wednesday?
Man, I can't help but keep looking at Gordon Hayward, as unfortunate as that is. A home matchup against Chicago. He played 30 plus minutes for the first time this season in his last game. Dan played 31 minutes. But we do know that if this game gets out of control, Hayward will be the first guy off the court. I think we can say that confidently. But he still interests me because if you're getting 31 minutes from Hayward, hell, maybe more. I don't think it'll be more. I think it'll be around 30, 32. But if that's the case, he's still too cheap. He hasn't been very good. when you're playing 26, 27 minutes, okay. But once you get up to 31, those, additional 5 or so minutes, that makes a pretty big difference, right? It makes a sizable difference because he's averaging what? Let's see, how many fantasy points per minute this year? He's averaging 0.93 fantasy points per minute. So if you're getting that across 32 minutes or so, that's right around 30 fantasy points. And it's not to say that he can't outproduce his current pace, because we know he can. So yeah, I have some interest in Hayward for sure. The blowout concerns me, but that's pretty much the end of it. I also think you have to pay close attention to what's going on with Covington and Saric. If Wiggins is out, Covington is really cheap. And Saric, it's possible that he might start over Taj Gibson. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many minutes he'll get, but I do think if he starts that he's probably going to see around 30, especially with Thibodeau coaching. And Saric is 4,500. He's not having a good season, but that is definitely cheap enough. A guy with multi-position eligibility to consider him if he gets the nod at power forward.
It is a tough time to project Taj Gibson for getting anything less than 36 minutes for the Timberwolves. But,
crazy.
Crazy. I do.
Josh Richardson too, by the way. And I'm sorry, so I don't forget. Damari Carroll might benefit greatly from the absence of Karis LeVert. He's really, really cheap. And he played 24 minutes last game after playing 14 and 16 in his first games. So you might see Damari Carroll come all the way up to 28-30 here. And he's really, really, really cheap. So keep Damari Carroll on the radar for sure, and stay tuned for what Atkinson decides to do.
I need to make mention that though the injury was not as severe as we thought, it is obviously going to open up minutes there for the Nets with Karis LeVert out. Damari Carroll is not the first name that would have come to my mind there of who would benefit from it, but to say honestly, I don't know who else would. It wasn't a thought of, oh, I know Alan Crabb's going to get a ton more, or Joe Harris or anybody, but Carroll makes a ton of sense, and somebody on the cheaper end. Seems like we have some cheap options here at small forward that have some potential tournament upside as we go through. Don't forget, as always, you can sign up for Awesemo.com, get into Slack chat where these discussions go on all day, getting ready for lineup lock each and every night. We move on to power forward Anthony Davis. When he's healthy, he's really good at the basketball. 25 points, 20 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 blocks last time out in the 126-110 win over Toronto. He's dynamic. We know what he can do. Gets a matchup here with Minnesota, who I believe still sits at the bottom of the defensive rating statistic over there on NBA.com. Yep, they're at 113. Oh, well, they're tied with the Wizards. The Wizards are bad. The Wizards are a bad basketball team.
Crazy how bad they are. It's really a surprise.
A net rating of -6.3. Now, who knows what Jimmy Butler leaving will do? You bring in Covington, who is a good defensive player, and maybe it's addition by subtraction here, getting rid of Butler and changing the dynamic and chemistry of this team. But nonetheless, Davis here against Minnesota, not really sure who's stopping him per se. Plenty of people have talked about how Karl-Anthony Towns is soft and is not somebody that you were necessarily intimidated by on the low block. You move on to Giannis, LeBron, Paul George, all power forward eligible here. Then you get Blake, Lamar Aldridge, Aaron Gordon, Randall, Tatum, and when we move on. But probably top end between Davis and Blake Griffin, LaMarcus Aldridge. Anybody pique your interest above 8K at power forward?
Yeah, the reason I'm not huge on Giannis is because I think this is a really good spot. Excuse me, for Anthony Davis. Just a really good spot. I don't know how you don't like this, how you couldn't like this spot, especially if Gibson comes off the bench. Then you're looking at Towns, Saric starting front court. That is as unimposing as it gets. And Davis appears to be more aggressive recently. But what would really put Davis over the top for me is like a clear top play. He's already a really good play, but what would put him over the top would be if Mirotic is out. If Mirotic is out, that changes the entire landscape for this team. Anthony Davis will be someone that I'm plugging into a lot of lineups. I'm not big on Griffin. Aldridge is fine, but I think he's still a little bit overpriced. Mirotic will wait on that news, but if he's out, then Julius Randle becomes a clear play here as well. We saw him produce very solid numbers with Mirotic off the court. It's surprisingly a deep position here, and I'll just keep going. Larry Nance against the Wizards, Nance played big minutes and also was sat in the final few minutes of the blowout. But you're talking about a game that the starters were benched with, I guess, like 4 minutes left or so, and he played 35 minutes. So really good run for Nance. Not a great game, but yeah, you're still getting, I think you had like 30 fantasy points from him or so. You got what, 27 and a half. So yeah, you definitely would want it to be better than that. But Larry Nance is a great play here, especially if Mirotic plays and you're not going to get that value. Somebody else, if you're looking for a pivot in this similar price range, it's very risky because of his foul trouble. But Jaren Jackson Jr., man, I love this kid. I just absolutely love what he's doing outside, of course, of the near foul out per 36, but he's brought that down recently. Jaren Jackson was fouling out or coming close in almost every game to start the season. And now you're looking at him limiting that. He has 3 or fewer personal fouls in 5 straight games. Before that, 5, 4, 5, 6, 4, 5. Like that's real. So hopefully we see some improvement. Now, I don't like predicting foul trouble, but Jaren Jackson's probably going to see a healthy dose of Giannis, and that's concerning. However, you're talking about a guy who's putting up awesome overall numbers and makes for such a good, reliable fantasy play if he's not fouling out. Because, look, 7 per game totals. He's averaging what? 11 and a half points, 5 rebounds, 1.8 blocks, 1 steal, 1.5 assists. You're not going to get much on the assist front, but damn, if he's not scoring, he can do other things. And if he's not doing other things, he can score. Last game, 10 points, 11 rebounds, 3 assists, 5 blocks, 1 steal, 20 points, 7 rebounds, 3 blocks, 3 steals, 15 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, 5 blocks. I love those type of players that can chip in everywhere. So while I worry about the matchup, I'm going to have Jaren Jackson in my player pool given the upside, and that's really all it comes down to.
Makes sense to me. The fouls may scare some folks off in the end, but the upside is there for sure. He's a junior, right? It's JJJ.
Correct.
Jaren Jackson Jr.
Correct.
Good for him. Triple J. Let's. I have to ask you this.
Marquise Morris too against Cleveland is way too cheap. Did I beat you to it?
Yeah,
love it. Love it. I thought you were moving on to center, so I had to sneak it in there.
No, I said I was gonna say I have to ask you, and because just like good old days, Marquise Morris is on the ledger. Gonna be a good day, folks. It's gonna be a good day.
Probably isn't. If you look at his minutes against Orlando, 3 games back, he wasn't played in the final like 15 minutes of the game. Neither was Otto Porter Jr. Neither was Dwight Howard. The bench brought them back from the depths of hell, and Scott Brooks decided to run with them. So chalk that one up as just kind of an anomaly. Miami, I'd have to look into, but I know he got in foul trouble against Dallas, played only 22 minutes. Last game he faced Orlando, and I know people were like, "Oh, he only played 26 minutes against them last time." Yeah, that's because Scott Brooks went with the hot hand. That had nothing to do with Marquise Morris not getting minutes the next time out. 39 minutes against this same Orlando team. This is why if you're going to look at game logs, or if you're going to look at how they've done against the team in the past, you can't just browse the box score. You can't just look at how many fantasy points they're averaging, because things are always different. And there's subtle nuance to all of these games, Dan. Because if you looked at Marquise Morris's last 3 prior to that 39-minute game, you'd be like, yeah, I don't want to touch this guy at all, until you see why he wasn't getting the minutes. So I think he plays around 35 minutes again here if all goes according to plan against a really bad Cleveland defense. It's
popcornmachine.net, for those of you who are maybe new to the game, is a site that is not easy to navigate per se, but gives you game flows. So gives you minutes played and who people are playing with. You do see a couple of anomalies here for Morris, as Dave's describing, over a couple of games where not really consistent, but he sure does play a ton of minutes in the second quarter over the course of the season. So lots of time there spent over the course of the second quarter, almost a few different games where he's played the entire second quarter. So just funny to take a look through there. And to Dave's point, it's all about context. Box scores are great, And stats are great. Statistics give you a lot of information, but you want to have the context as to why those stats came to be and where they came from. While we're on the subject of statistics, I do want to ask you, how do you feel about Markelle Fultz's free throw for?
Oh, what does that have to do with statistics?
Absolutely nothing.
I mean, maybe Parkinson's, but not statistics. That was really concerning. Please don't take offense to that. Please don't take offense to that. That's not serious. I'm not degrading anyone or poking fun, but it really did look like he had a
tick, like a full-on tick.
Yeah. Whatever it was really strange. He basically pump faked. He said it slipped out of his hand. I don't buy it. Obviously, as the days go on, everything Fultz is looking like he's going to end up being a big disappointment. The one reason Philly hasn't gotten on him as much is very simple. The kid hustles his ass off. He chases up every missed shot, which is almost all of his shots. He goes for the offensive boards. He's not afraid to get in amongst the trees and play physical basketball. So that that's the positive. But he's got a long ways to go. But they're not giving up on him because I'm sure teams would have at least been interested in trying to trade and develop him, or not. Right? Maybe not. But at this point, you can't really give up on him. The hope, though, is that they know when to give up, and they're not running backwards trying to develop him because they don't want to have a first overall pick that busts, and they just keep running him out there for significant minutes when he's not helping the basketball team. But Brett Brown's been pretty good about it, and his foul shot is still bad, to answer your question.
All right, let's move on to center. Had to get a take from you there before we got off of this podcast. Center, obviously, AD eligible here. You do get Joel Embiid, 10K plus at 10.5. Karl-Anthony Towns on the other side of this matchup with the Pelicans at 9.5. Drummond, who has been a crazy 2020 machine on the year at 9,300. Then we get a drop-off to Whiteside, Vucevic, Gobert, and on we go. How do you feel about the Embiid matchup, and where else are you going here at center?
I'll definitely have some Embiid. I still think he's too cheap, even with Butler here. You're talking about a guy who gets to the line at a ridiculous clip, and not only does he get to the line at a ridiculous rate, but he's shooting 80% from the free throw line. Like, you wonder sometimes why he has such big games and he didn't shoot that well. I mean, hell, he was 16 for 20 at the stripe the other day, 19 for 22 against Charlotte, 18 for 23 against Detroit. He can get to the line at such a ridiculous rate and foul out these defensive-minded centers. You just post them up one-on-one and everything unravels. But he's playing huge minutes, Dan, right? He's averaging 35 minutes per game, and he's played 36 or more in 4 straight. I'm still going to have some Embiid. It's really just comes down to him being so good that it doesn't even matter. And in a lot of spots where people didn't have any interest in playing him, me included, he goes off for 69 fantasy points, 79, 64, 68. It's a good spot. He has 9 games with 30 plus points and 10 plus rebounds this year, Dan. So he's crushing it. But I also think Vooch on the other side is very interesting here. While Embiid is a very solid defender, their overall defense in the paint has not been very good. And they've actually allowed some big games to opposing centers. Now, I don't like playing guys against Embiid, but Vooch is a really appealing option here. He has range. I think he's one of the guys that matches up well enough with Joel Embiid and probably won't get into foul trouble because he doesn't really care much about defense. But yeah, the Sixers are allowing more points to opposing centers than any team this season, Dan. More points than any team, and also allowing the highest efficiency to the position. Vooch really stands out to me as someone that I'm going to have a good amount of at a very reasonable price point.
Mid-tier, low-tier, any cheaper options here at center that you think flash some upside? You do have Cantor down at 6,600. I know his minutes have fluctuated somewhat wildly with Mitchell Robinson there for the Knicks, but he's been consistent, putting up 30-plus points in his past 3 games. He had 65 points back against Chicago on the 5th, 34 before that. Does Canner play into some plans here against Oklahoma City, his former squad?
I'm probably not going to go here, and I'll just tell you why. Cantor is, I guess you could say, he's reasonably priced. I'm not big on going up. I'm playing guys against Steven Adams. He just embarrasses opposing centers, especially offensive-minded ones like Cantor. Cantor's a great scorer. Sure, he could have a good game, but there are so many other options here at center that probably not going to be a focal point for me, Dan. One of them would be Hassan Whiteside, 8,400 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, Whiteside is 92. Like Vooch is 82 on FanDuel. He's a better play than Whiteside for sure. But where Whiteside and Vooch are so closely priced on DraftKings, I really like him. He, as we know, has immense upside, could legitimately triple-double on points, rebounds, and blocks. He's done it several times before. And he's facing this Brooklyn team that even if they have Jared Allen, you're going to like him. But if Allen is out and you have like Hollis Jefferson and Ed Davis at the 5, that could get really ugly really quick. So this is a great spot for Whiteside. I'll just go down the list quickly. Karl Anthony Towns is still in play against the Pelicans. I don't love the spot. I'll probably end up more in that low 8K range like we talked about, but Towns is a good play. Wendell Carter Jr. at Boston, his price came down to 5,700. I don't know what Hoiberg's doing with his minutes, but he's a tournament dart throw that I'm going to have some of. Same with Joe Val. I think you could see Valanciunas start this game over Ibaka, and if he does against Drummond at 5K, I will have some Valanciunas also. And Dwight Howard is 5,800 against Cleveland, Dan. Really good spot. Same price as Tristan Thompson, who's been playing out of his mind. You want to play Tristan Thompson and ride that hot hand or ride the wave until it inevitably crashes. I don't have an issue with that, but I think Dwight is definitely in play here. And last one, Brooke Lopez. I don't like the matchup. I don't. There's no doubt. But just going forward, keep this in mind. He's played 37 minutes in back-to-back games now, and that is not something we saw from Brolo. He's playing low 20s in minutes. So keep a close eye on him going forward. If we get him in a great matchup at that price, Brolo is going to have to be in a lot of our lineups.
What's the thought here on DeAndre Ayton? 6,400.
I knew you were going to go there. I'm reading your mind.
There it is. A matchup with Pau Gasol, who's no matchup.
Out though.
Oh, is Gasol out? Okay, so a matchup against.
But it's funny because the Spurs have been allowing a ton of rebounds to opposing bigs since Pau Gasol went out. It could just be a small sample size thing, but yeah, Pau Gasol's out.
But I mean, whether or not Gasol's in or out here, Ayton's price tag has dropped back to mid sixes. He had, I think, gotten up to 7,500 earlier this season. Any interest here for somebody who's playing 30 to 35 minutes a night against a team that we've seen struggle a little bit at the rim on the season?
Yeah, and this is something I've mentioned a bunch throughout the year. Ayton is still getting minutes and blowouts. That's really important. If he could still play 35 minutes, even if they get smoked, I like that, right? Like he'll come back in 3 minutes into the fourth and leave with 2 minutes left. You know, he's just getting his normal rotation, no matter the score. I guess you're looking to break him in and mature him a bit in what was already guaranteed to be a lost year. But yeah, no, you're definitely right. DeAndre Ayton at 6,400 is, in my opinion, mispriced. Even at 7K on FanDuel, I think that's fair. He hasn't given you the monster game yet, but he's given us high 40s like several times. And it's only a matter of time before this dude just erupts, because with all of his just natural gifts, you're talking about excellent rebounder, very capable scorer, great court vision and basketball IQ, can rack up assists. And I think you're going to see the shot blocking and steal totals climb as well. So you have pretty much everything that lines up at such a cheap price point. Pulling up his college stats, he averaged almost 2 blocks a game, Dan. That number's got to come up. There's no way he's only going to average 0.8 blocks. So I'm with you, 6,400 against the San Antonio team that probably gets a little bit more credit defensively than they deserve this year is a really good play.
Yep, playing on their history more so than the actual players on hand. You've made mention many times over losing not only Kawhi, but Danny Green obviously affects the way this team plays defense, throwing Parker and Manu just from a simple system perspective. you start to see some holes in the wall there as they start to figure out who they are with DeRozan, and LMA is really the main cogs to both offensive and defensive possessions. Any other players across all positions that you want to mention, or anything you want to say before we end the podcast here?
I think I forgot to mention Yusuf Nurkic. So Yusuf Nurkic belongs in the conversation. The problem is Yusuf Nurkic, point per dollar wise, or I'm sorry, per minute wise, is on another level this year, right? Like Yusuf Nurkic per minute production is out of this world. It is, let me just, because it's really good, Dan. 1.4, but he's not getting 30 minutes a game. I mean, he's played 30 minutes in like 3 of 13 games this year. That worries me, but it's a good spot. You know, the Lakers are going to play big, so I think Nurkic stays on the court. Really good spot. Him and Ayton are really nicely priced on DraftKings, and hell, even on FanDuel, Ayton is a great price, but Nurkic just too much at 8K.
All right, that's where we're going to leave it. Don't forget, you can find Dave's writing over there on Awesemo.com Monday, Wednesday, Friday. That is the deep dive, and then you have the deeper dive, Adam and Dave, most days, depending on the schedule. You can always check out the schedule in Slack chat if you're over there, or you can head on over to the website and check out all the information you need about Awesemo. You can use the promo code EARLYBIRD, which is the name of this podcast, to get yourself a free week of Awesemo.com. And from what I understand, that is all the bells and whistles, everything included. You can also find Dave on Sirius XM Radio on Saturday from 5 to 7 and Sunday 7 to 9 throughout the NFL season. Should see a schedule change once NFL comes to close, and NBA is in full swing and MLB is around the corner. So probably around January or February for that. With that said, you find Dave on Twitter at Lofty_D, LOUGHY_D, myself at Dan Stravard. It's Awesemo_com for Awesemo, and any questions you have about the product or any thing about the website, you can check out over there on Twitter. So with all that said, on Wednesday, we wish you the best luck. On Thursday, you get Emac and Adam. Dave and I are back Friday morning right here on the DFS earlier. Right here.
Oh, you almost had it. That was good.
On the DFS Early Bird, presented by Awesemo.com.